Good evening to everybody. Tonight we're welcoming Alejandro Zaera-Polo to lecture at SCI-Arc within the thesis program, the graduate thesis program. I met Alejandro, I think maybe 13 years ago. I made some math, and I was trying to figure out when we met. I think we were all part of a very unique coalition called United Architects, which unexpectedly was selected as one of the 5 finalists for the World Trade Center competition, which arguably was one of the most politicized projects in the US. Eventually, we lost, but Daniel Libeskind won. And at that time, Florencia was not here, but she's also faculty at SCI-Arc. Jackie Bloom and I were all working for Greg Lynn Forum. And we were shipped to New York, literally, I think, that was, to join forces with other four offices that represented at that point the digital generation of architecture, and FOA was one of them. During our conversation, Alejandro and I discussed mainly the plan organization of the towers. During the competition, it became very clear that he was not what we would consider a typical digital architect, meaning only a formalist, but he had a keen and pragmatic interest in tectonics, practice, technology, and economy. It was clearly the byproduct of a traditional European education system mixed with GSD Ivy League pedigree. Yes, he was part of that larger and larger group of wandering architects, traveling around the world that belonged nowhere and observed the world through foreign eyes. A state of mind that we all got used to, I think. Foreigners always in between different time frames of references, both personal and socio-political, between global capitalism and neo-Marxist philosophy. I always wonder what compelled Alejandro and his former partner Farshid to call their office FOA. Vaguely reminiscent of OMA, their first workplace before starting their own practice, FOA sounded ambitious and unsettled, but most of all sounded new. To my eyes, Alejandro was the impersonation of the fairy tale of architecture, because he won in 1995 at such a young age the opportunity to build the Yokohama Port Terminal, and therefore crystallize a type of investigation that involved a whole generation of digital architects, and to test it into reality. At a later time, when I actually made it to see the port, the pier, I realized that the project was not only about a way or a new way to understand form, way of understanding digital tools or construction, but also offered an extensive social vision. Among the many texts of theory that Alejandro wrote, the one that most resonated in the field of architecture is The Politics of Envelope. It was published, the first version at least, in 2008, and came after many years of successful practice of building, foreign buildings, and by foreign I mean other than usual, and seemed to answer a personal urge to make order among the different sites, clients, programs, technological and economical specificity of each and every one of them, to find a frame of reference, to compare the provocative work, and also to guide and direct the work that would come afterwards. His text used the envelope to organize a complex and difficult set of relationships between politics, types, tectonic, and form, all elements that only a prolific entrepreneur knows how to navigate. This is what I like to call mature work, that shows how one can address the structure of power architects need to face in the making of a building. This text has been proven to be able to define a mindset that might gain to architects a new and needed political leverage. This way of cataloging contemporary envelopes created also a way of looking at architecture through its elements, and clearly resonated with a way of approaching research. This way of thinking culminated in Rem Koolhaas's theme for the 2014 Architectural Venice Biennale, where the same methodology was expanded to all the types of elements that compose a building. In addition to running his practice, Alejandro has also had an extensive involvement in education at any international level. He served as Dean of the School of Architecture at Princeton University, and before that, he served as the Dean of the Berlage Institute in Rotterdam. In 2009, he was awarded Norman Foster Visiting Professor at Yale, and he has been visiting critics at Columbia, UCLA, and he held a diploma unit for 8 years at the Architectural Association in London. In 2011, after the dissolution of FOA, he established Alejandro Zaera-Polo and Maider Llaguno architecture. Please join me in welcoming Alejandro to CEAR.
Okay, thank you, Elena, for your invitation that finally we managed to happen. The talk tonight is actually the first time I do it, and it's like many of these talks, when you are involved in academia or speculation, you are on one side serving the interests of your practice and responding to calls and to commissions, and at the same time you need to somehow manage to create some sort of discourse about what you are doing. And so you keep asking yourself, so why are we doing that? What is what we are heading to? And in a way, this is a talk that is the first attempt to draft or to explain a new formulation of ideas that we are starting to develop. It's in a very incipient moment, so most of this theory is still unconstructed, but I think CEAR was perhaps a good place to test this and basically try to engage with a discussion or try to get some feedback about what we are doing. So the idea that we are now trying to apply to the work, because that's really the way things work. First you do the work, you are interested in some ideas, and certain topics, certain concepts start to be formulated, and then those concepts enter in the work that you are doing. So there is a sort of feedback mechanism. So this is the idea that we are starting to conceive now as a larger project is the idea that whatever we do in our work, in our projects, as architects, not just as service professionals, has to do with the possibility of reconstituting, reformulating, reorganizing the world in its most basic terms. And so we have been lately drawn closer to the idea that by doing certain things in our projects, we are in some way creating cosmologies, creating new interpretations of the world. And when we started thinking about this idea of cosmology, immediately the most primitive cosmologies appeared. So the cosmologies that explain that the world is made out of 4 elements: air, water, earth, and fire was the kind of inspiration for this idea. So in a way, the claim that we would like to make, not now, now we are going to start the claim. The claim will probably take several years to be formulated, and maybe will never be entirely formulated, but the claim is that in treating those elements, those basic elements, as our matters of concern, we are changing in some ways the way we inhabit the world. So air was the first element that we have, in a way, already started to work on. The other elements are in a much more sketchy form at the moment, and air came out of the work of my partner, Maider Llaguno, who is a real kind of technology genius, and is doing a PhD on air, on actually, I don't know exactly what she's doing, but something like micro microturbulence, the importance of microturbulence in the ventilation of urban corridors or something like that. But so this is a thing that we have now in the garage. Is a custom-made wind tunnel that she has made to be able to study what is the form, what is the behavior of airflow around buildings. And so you see it's a wind tunnel coupled with a robot, which is what is on top. And the robot does two things. It carves out things, so it's at the same time it has like a head that can dig into the pieces of matter that she tests in the model, but at the same time it also has a sensor. So with the sensor she can measure the different wind speeds and temperatures and the qualities of the wind in the canyons in between the buildings. This is a more professional one that she's using now at Princeton, and this is also part of the research, which is done basically the PhD is in the ETH in Zurich, although she's basically mainly working in Princeton now. So what she does is to study the space in between blocks and see what happens with the air, which is the exchange rate of air. Depending on the form of the buildings, the air changes. The air changes speed. There are certain areas of the spaces in between that are more or less ventilated. So some of these, so you see when the section changes, different things happen. And I'm not able to explain you what this whole thing is. I just show you what is the kind of approach and what is the kind of intelligence and familiarity with something that it exists around us, and is one of these four elements that basically she's studying and testing the different effects that by changing the form of buildings. Here you see the head of the robot digging into one of these blocks, testing different levels of ruggedness in the surface, because the idea is the air, depending on the ruggedness of the surface, produces a different type of turbulent flow that has certain effects in how the air surrounding the buildings behaves. So this is basically the beginning of that interest in air, and it's also, I mean, it looks like interesting and scientific, is incredibly frustrating also for an architect to be doing these kind of things, because when you look at these matters with this level of precision, very often it's almost as if every single little thing becomes a world on its own, and it never enables you to come to a conclusion. And we've discussed many times that perhaps what we end up left with after being engaged in this kind of investigations is a sense of almost impossibility to entirely understand reality. So there is a moment in which, if we are architects, we need to take with us whatever we have been able to learn by engaging in those experiments, and somehow make a leap of faith and come up with hypotheses that then get tested back sometimes into these experimental environments, but sometimes they just go into entirely random tangents. So this is going to be the only competition work that I'm going to show tonight. most or all the other projects are projects that are designed or are under design development or are under construction. And in some ways, I am showing this one because I thought it was an interesting start with when we were trying to apply the knowledge that she was developing about air to architecture. So the project was a competition that was actually an open competition in Shenzhen. We were very interested in it because of the scale of it, that we thought would maybe legitimize the revision of some of these utopian projects made in the 60s, the continuous monument, the idea that a city is in some way something that, a milieu that is continuous, that is somehow deployed onto nature and establish certain relationships onto nature. Nature is obviously very much part of this idea of the elements that we are trying to reconfigure by doing architecture. So the beginning was to test the hypothesis that the city can be made with a grid not of streets, but actually of buildings, so that the buildings are infinitely flexible, the buildings are always communicated, and this grid was tested to different scales, and both of urban spaces and of buildings. And somehow we, out of doing this typological analysis, we ended up with a certain grid scale that we thought was most adequate for both urban, the creation of urban environments, but also for the provision of certain microclimates that would develop into these inside of this square. So it was a city made out of squares, where the pattern of streets was contingent to the grid, was carving into the grid. It was an eroded grid, and this erosion had to do both with the layout of the grid, but also with environmental concerns, which are very much, I mean, when we talk about the elements, you can immediately guess that some of the most important areas of interest for us now is the environment, which is the constitution of all these different elements that we control by doing architecture. So Hugh Ferris, Malevich, all these ideas about the grid being eroded, being excavated both by wind, by solar exposure, and by transport, was in a way the beginning of the project. That then at some point, due to the brief of the competition, had to grow. So the grid was, in some enclaves, was growing very, very tall, buildings that over 100 stories high, and sometimes it had other qualities. So, but it was always a continuous element based on that first idea of the continuous monument. And this is where, you know, once we set the concept, we went back to the modeling of the environment around these towers and started producing or testing what the configuration of this grid could do, and what effects we could perform by carving the grid. So this is some of these elements in which we were trying to achieve a certain amount of ventilation, of wind velocity in the spaces, in the urban spaces. So the idea was to provide certain conditions of urban comfort that were adequate. And so there you see how these very basic shapes, the idea was that the grid was 15 meters wide. You will see this appearing again and again, the kind of most flexible, but also the maximum width that can be naturally ventilated without air conditioning was a condition of departure for the design of the grid. And there you see basically how this kind of voxelized mesh of buildings was being carved out from below and from above in order to produce certain conditions. This was done, actually, this requires an enormous amount of computational power. We were relying on the server of the ETH to which Maider has access, and I think that in some cases there were 50 nodes of great capacity working for weeks in making some of these calculations that resulted into a more or less conventional type of space, orthogonal, but always with this kind of voxelized figure that we think is interesting, and we don't think that is interesting only in terms of its form, but basically if you try to test in these computers more complex forms, there is a moment where simply there is no computational power available to us, at least, that would be able to compute this problem. So in some ways, the voxelization came out came out probably first as part of the tools that we were using to test the effects and the levels of comfort that we were trying to produce in the city, but then it became also some sort of aesthetic background to the project, and so this is the master plan, which has this grid with some points where it would grow very tall, and also at this point a number of other things came into the project, like this idea that the city or this kind of eroded grid had some sort of ruin quality. So then certain things start connecting to perhaps other things that we are interested in. The green nature eating away the city, like in the images from Piranesi, and the people who were some time ago interested in ruins came to our mind and became not on one side a way of reducing the heat island effects and all these things that have to do also with the creation of a certain microclimate, but also some source of aesthetic enjoyment. So these are some of the images of this city that obviously then developed other narratives of how people would move through the city, and the type of environments that would be produced in a city that is not just the city of the future, but a city of we like to call this city of an immediate future. So it's not a kind of utopia of something that will happen in 100 years, but it's something that is likely to happen in 10 or 15 years. And we are very interested in that temporal frame, for not only for this project, but for many other projects. Second project that came out of this interest in air was a competition that we won recently in Vienna for a tower in this location close to the canal. And what was was a kind of auspicious of this doing this competition was that when we opened the brief, it was an invited competition. When we opened the brief, we realized that there were 3 pages of air concerns, because Vienna is a very windy city, and apparently wind is a very important issue for the city of Vienna, which was together with the client, which is a company called Austro Control, which is, by the way, the air traffic control in Austria. So again, the air seemed to be mysteriously appearing everywhere. And also there was, in the brief of the competition, a great deal of attention paid to casting shadows onto neighboring buildings. So we found out that in Austria there are certain protocols that you need to apply in order to ensure that you are not casting shadows for more than 2 hours onto neighboring buildings, and so on and so forth. And those became really the beginning of the project. So there you see different footprints that would accommodate the required program tested in terms of how did they shadow the buildings behind. This is basically the system that is used, and the conclusion of this research was that in that particular location, unless we adopted something similar to this kind of rhomboidal shape, I mean, it could have a different shape at the front, but the back, the way to maximize the footprint of the tower was to make this tapered form that then became a rhomboidal shape. And so at this point also we started thinking, how can we make that shape more effective in terms of wind pressure? This is again this scientific background coming back onto the project. This is the patterns that appear on the face of a tower by effect of the wind, what we basically set out to do, provided that we had already discovered that there was an ideal rhomboidal shape oriented in the direction of the wind, was the most efficient way. We then decided to streamline the shape. These are some of these tests trying to avoid drag coefficient on the tower to minimize the structure, and also avoid the downdraft effect that happens when the wind hits towers and is projected down to the ground. And so what we started to think was how to basically reshape the form of the tower in such a way that would improve the behavior of the form in respect to the wind that is primarily traveling in the direction that this rhomboid is oriented. And then it kind of proliferated into a number of other metaphors or ideas that would make perhaps the building more understandable to the client, but that in some ways also had something to do with air. So the final form of the tower is this kind of rounded rhomboidal tower, which sharpens up on the direction of the wind at the top and becomes more rounded as it comes down in order to avoid downdraft effects. And these are pictures of the model in relation to the neighboring towers. There's a little cluster towers appearing in this enclave in Vienna. And this is, I think, for me, probably the most interesting part of the design, because the tower is, I mean, we deliberately sought a very conventional tower. That was the way in which we could actually and make the client understand what we were proposing, but in the way in which we constructed the skin of the tower and shaped those rounded corners that then taper into an edge, into an acute angle was like this. And what is interesting about the way we've designed the envelope of the tower is that there are most of the faces are totally flat and totally conventional in terms of using a standard, well, actually not so standard curtain wall, but a curtain wall like many of the ones that you have seen. And then the mullions are only differentiating in the corners, and that produces also an interesting effect, which is that the mullions are slightly tilted. So I mean, this is we'll look at, maybe we jump. So you see basically that the tower looks like Caesar Pelli Tower, for example, to say to put a kind of clear example, and yet all these mullions are slightly tilted. So we are actually very interested in this almost, and we don't know what is gonna how it is going to work, but we suspect that the fact that the mullions are slightly tilted, but that the finish of the tower is like any other corporate conventional tower, is going to produce an effect of instability that we are very interested in. It's almost like doing a kind of very subtle, very very discreet approach to how the tower will be perceived. There are some other interesting things about the project, which is that the air, again, I mean, talking about the air, is a tower that will have no ducts. It's a tower that have a distributed system of ventilation units that take air from the facade and extract it from the core, and has a double glass facade, which is actually 4 layers of glass that will act as a trombe wall, having different modes during winter and summer. But maybe that's detailed now to explain. But in some ways, the idea, and there is an interesting experimentation there, in which we and our consultants do not know exactly how this will work. We don't know whether the fans that are inside of these distributed ventilation units will have the air moving in a certain way inside of these 2 layers of glass, where we are preheating or pre-cooling naturally the air before is pumped into or let into the interior space. But this is for us also a matter of interest in this project. So that there are, we think that many things that are almost imperceptible, but that I think will become incredibly important in the final result of the building. And in some ways, the whole notion of working with air is conducive to that. I mean, it's interesting to see these drawings that are coming out of the computer or the robot measuring air velocities around objects that that we don't see, but that are there. And we quite like the idea that that the building will have a little bit of that quality of something that has been slightly moved off the conventional. That is an approach that we tend to use quite often in our projects. This is another project which started 2 years ago, or nearly 3 years ago maybe, which was also a competition that is now under construction, and which we are building in Locarno, a city in the south of Switzerland, in Ticino. And the project is basically the headquarters of the Locarno Film Festival, with a number of cinema rooms that had to be located, not necessarily. I mean, I think we actually won the competition because we didn't touch this building. So the brief enabled the competitors to even demolish entirely the building to build this new building, but we knew that politically there was a big resistance in the city to demolish it, and so our strategy was to preserve the building as much as we could. And so all we did basically was to pile the cinema rooms on top of each other and simply rebuild some sort of box at the top of the existing building that was golden, because it was golden and had some kind of leopard skin pattern. And the leopard skin pattern came out of the fact that the Locarno Film Festival, the award is called the Pardo d'Oro, which is the golden leopard. So the idea, I mean, you can see that when we do a competition, we try to win it. So we are not necessarily trying to do an experiment, but we target quite precisely the existing conditions of the site and the surrounding environment. So it was basically a golden ingot with some sort of leopard pattern that was topping the existing building in which we were locating. This is the kind of logo of the film festival. And so, I mean, I'm not going to explain the building because it has nothing to do with air, and we started doing this project long before we became consciously interested in air. But basically it was about voiding the interior spaces and rebuilding certain areas and locating 3 rooms, 1 large one and 2 smaller ones, and a foyer inside of the building. And so we were left basically with the design of that golden ingot that had to be at the. I mean, we are doing other things in the inside, but they're not relevant to this question. But we started having enormous problems to detail that golden ingot with the leopard pattern. We went through all sorts of experiments with perforated steel, with double. I mean, this is actually a moire pattern made out of 2 layers of colored stainless steel, perforated with a pattern that it was tilted, I don't know, 5.4 degrees, so that when you would walk around the building, you would see some sort of moire effect happening at the top of the building. But then we became interested in air, and then we came across these things, which I don't know whether you know. Is basically installations from an artist called Ned Kahn that makes these walls of little reflective flags that are moved by the wind and that produce these sort of organic effects that we were trying to achieve in the skin of with the perforations of the leopard skin through different milieux. So at some point we thought, so why don't we instead of trying to detail this as a perforated metal element, we simply copy the thing that NetCan has been working on, and we get the wind to produce this kind of diffusion. I mean, we also studied for a while the processes that stain the leopard skin in this fashion, and they're called chemical diffusion, or you throw some kind of dye into a milieu, and there are certain things that happen with superficial tension that produce these things. So in this case, we replace a fixed pattern by a moving pattern that also had something to do with the idea of a digital screen. I mean, we are finally designing building for movies. So we thought that the idea of having some kind of digital facade that by the wind effect produces these patterns was interesting. So this is basically the detail of that. That screen is made out of these little flags that would move with the air and reflect the light in these kind of changing patterns. This is a mock-up, one-to-one mock-up, because now we are developing the design. Looks like a drawing, looks like a rendering, but it's actually real. So that's basically how this is going to be built. So what is interesting and also it will produce certain effects from the inside, because obviously the windows will be covered with this lattice of reflective tiles that would be constantly moving and enabling the view of the surrounding landscape in Switzerland, in Ticino, filtered by this kind of wind effects. So what is interesting about this movement from those experiments, those kind of attempts to understand a certain phenomenon, which is in this case the materiality and the behavior of air as a building material, and this last moment is precisely that kind of step in the void that we think that is eventually unavoidable. No matter how much do we want to understand reality, no matter how much do we want to be in control of the phenomena that we are operating with, eventually there is, and the proof is that we are actually using things that are very similar to sculptures or art pieces. We have finally to make that step away from understanding the reality and into creating it. And so, but I don't think that either of them separately is interesting. It's totally uninteresting to keep doing iteration after iteration of testing wind flow in an urban channel, and is, I think, also totally uninteresting to simply indulge in phenomenal effects. I think what is interesting of that movement that we are going through in regards to air is actually that being in between those two modes of operation and having them feeding each other back. I mean, obviously now there are ideas about measuring the wind pressure on the flags as opposed to measuring the wind pressure on the wind and trying to reduce the structural the structure of the screen and so on and so forth. So second element is much more sketchy, is much less researched, is just that after doing the wind, we know that we are now having to be looking at all our projects in terms of earth, water, or fire. And so I just kind of got a few recent projects that we had done that in some ways related to earth or to the treatment of the ground, and just put them together to show the new field of thinking that we are going to have to face in order to turn the practice into something significant beyond just doing these projects. So this is a small project that was completed last summer in Santander, in a city in the north of Spain. It's a boat storage building for the World Cup sailing that was happening last summer in this city, in Santander. There you see a famous dry dock that exists. This is like the docklands of this town in the north of Spain. And in this case, the proposal was very much related to Yokohama and to other projects that are already well explored in my past work, but you know, looking at it from the perspective of this new perspective of looking at trying to find how some sort of discourse or some sort of rationale about Earth, became interesting that this, which was supposed to be a sort of almost industrial facility with some stands to see the boats sailing past, became, well, like we had done in Yokohama, finished in an organic material, wood, and in grass. So the idea that the surface of the ground, which was an idea that we had thought before, but maybe not theorized as some sort of section of the earth that is finished in some sort of organic layer, became much more present. I mean, the building is as you see, otherwise very simple. It's just on one side it has stands. On the city side, it has this kind of green planting and a ramp that brings people up. A ramp and a stair is a kind of point of bifurcation from where you enter, and then again this kind of continuity of the ground becomes important. It's almost as if by doing buildings, and this is something that we will see more in the next projects, by doing buildings we were able to maintain the ants moving through. Normally a building would have the ants in the ground moving around the building. So when talking about this organic layer of the earth, these kind of topographies that are pliant and are sort of modifications of the topography, have this kind of quality of giving continuity to all this world of non-humans that also inhabit cities and buildings. So that's the tip of the building. I mean, I'm not going to I'm just going to flick through the images. There is nothing more to it than what I just explained. This is the inside with tilted columns. We will talk about the tilted columns again, because they, and perhaps is something that we are starting to explore in another project which we are designing now, which is, can you see the slide? It looks like a very thin. This is a project that we are doing now for Weifang University in China, and is two buildings in the campus of the in the new campus of Weifang University. That's northeast China. You probably have never heard about it, but it's a city that is 10 million people. And so the university is, there is a master plan that is made by Work AC that is revolving around the central axis. And we have two buildings. One of them is the gate building to your left. The other one is and that's the kind of central administration of the university. And the other building is a canteen on your right. And both buildings have been thought with this idea that the buildings should become like a literal part of the topography, of this kind of humus that wraps around the geological substrata of the earth, of the ground, and so that is the idea is that, as opposed to conventional campus buildings that are sort of artificial pieces in a natural enclave, the concept here is that there will be some sort of blurring of that limit between the artificial and the natural. The first building I'm going to explain is the canteen, and the canteen is the building on your right, and the topography of this site is very flat, and so the idea of the canteen, which is in the north side of the main quadrant of the university or the future campus, is trying to form a topography that will host the canteen also, but will add some sort of theatrical elevation to the public areas of the university that are otherwise rather flat. So we started looking at Baroque stairs, Baroque gardens. This idea that again that the nature and the artificial can be blend together, and so the building is almost like a Miesian cross between a Miesian building, a kind of Berlin gallery, but where some areas have been pushed down until they have formed this Baroque system of ramps that covers the main dining room, which caters for 3,000 people. So it's a very simple strategy. The idea again is that there is a continuity of the ground on the surface, and that we have these skylights that are lighting the space below and form a continuous garden crawling up the building and enable people to enter on a different level, because there is a mezzanine level that we have to supply to provide in order to supply the number of covers that they will require. And I mean, it's very simple. In some ways, what was interesting about these two projects is that we know we are not going to be very much involved with the delivery of the project. They are going to be very cheap projects, so we have to use the absolute basic building technologies. And so we thought that was an ideal situation to make buildings that are like mountains, but not like mountains like the ones that architects make. You know, there are a few architects making mountains around and doing this kind of faceted things. This is almost a mountain that is made out of the most basic conventional building technologies that can be used today in this place, which is in situ concrete, post and beam construction. The building has a kind of kitchen facility underground, and this is, can you see anything? You can see, I can see anything from here, but maybe you see something. Anyway, it's basically like a big open space with two entrances, almost like an in and out loop that surround. There is the lower area is occupied by a supermarket and the servery, and then there is just a flat floor and a mezzanine, which makes a loop and looks over the lower level and is accessible from the. Sorry, this is the main floor. What was I showing you before? So this was the mezzanine. So the mezzanine is accessible also from the quad side and looks down onto the main space, and the main plan is this one with the two entrances, the supermarket, the servery, and the dining room. And so this is the section, absolutely basic spans made with conventional concrete floor, and obviously the omnipresent cover of greenery around the building. This is basically how it is going to be built. We don't care about the inside. We've designed the structure, the most efficient structure. The only inefficiency that we have introduced is that the columns, like in the project before, are not perpendicular to the ground, are perpendicular to the top ground. So it's almost as if the whole building is now affected by this deformation of the surface. And this is how it will look. It's a kind of neo-brutalist approach. The other building is more of a conventional office building, and so it is based again based on modules that are 15 meters wide. Again, the idea of natural ventilation everywhere in the building, and that follows quite directly the hierarchical distribution of program in the university, starting with the president and the provost, and then coming down from the financial department down to security and registration. So it has the idea was that programmatically the building is pyramidal, so it has some sort of becomes some sort of X-ray of the order of command in the university, and by becoming pyramidal becomes also this mountain that then is carved and forms the gate to the university. So the cladding, the idea is that the cladding will be entirely planted, like the roof. Again, continuing this idea that the organic layer of the ground is enveloping the whole building. It's organized around 3 courtyards. One of them is an atrium, one of them is a hard surface, and the next one is a green courtyard. And the idea is that every one of the offices in the building has access on the same level to these kind of green terraces that are forming the mountain. Plans are absolutely banal. No, I'm not going to talk about them. Just again, absolutely conventional grid, 7.5 by 7.5 meters, a vanilla curtain wall. So the idea is actually to do something to make the mountain out of the most conventional technologies we could possibly found, in order to get the project to survive the Chinese environment. So that's basically, this is the entrance gate that forms the entrance into the main alleyway, into the mall of the university, that central mall where all the buildings are lined up, or all the public buildings of the university are there. But so this one is also creating that kind of public entrance with bridges that contain the high administration of the university. And this is the device that we are designing now more in detail, which is basically precast concrete channels that are hanging from the facade. The facade is a straightforward curtain wall these shading devices that are at the same time planted and are connected with water channels, so that you can imagine almost the building being wrapped by vegetation and water dropping off the roof of the building, and depending on the facade, it projects more or less in order to produce shading on the inside. These are the details of these elements, and these are these terraces that are going to be distributed through the building. So it goes from this kind of very monumental idea of a symmetrical Chinese gate leading onto the mall to this much more informal organization where the offices are mixed with gardens. Last experiment with the earth is a project that we did. It's a kind of theoretical project that we did this summer for the Greek Pavilion in Venice, also for the Venice Biennale, and we were asked to make some sort of project, some sort of demonstrative project related to tourism in Greece. And you all know what is happening now in Greece. The government has recently passed a law that, I mean, if you know Greece, basically you drive through the country and the whole country is under construction, because there are, it's either illegal or people keep the building half built in order not to have to pay taxes but reserve the height. So there is almost like a national situation of unfinishedness, but also a national situation where the coastline has been often spoiled by illegal construction. So the Greek government, as a way of obtaining money to survive, last year passed a law that that enables people to legitimize construction in previously illegal places by paying some money. And so that means that all these illegal constructions in the coastline are going to be legitimized. We look at the law and we proposed, which has 59 chapters, and we added a 60th chapter that was our proposal to the tourism industry and perhaps to the building industry in Greece, which was supposed to impose some additional conditions to the way buildings in landscape preserved locations would have to comply with. And so we call it Landscape Preservation Camouflage, and we identified, or actually we asked the curator of the whole Biennale, which is a friend, Yanis Aisopos, to find us a building that existed that we could reuse in order to make it dissolve, a building that was also very aggressive with the environment, that we could actually make it dissolve into the landscape. And we found this amazing case of the Salani Hotel, which is in the Peloponnesos, in a beautiful enclave. You cannot see it very well here, but it's basically like a conventional modernist block bang in the middle of a landscape. And it's a building that has an interesting story, because at some point became some sort of nudist colony that then was terminated by the local religious bodies demonstrating against foreigners being nude around, and eventually the building became abandoned and is now still in an abandoned condition. So this kind of nudist idea was interesting in the sense that what we were going to do was not to build a hotel, but to dress a hotel in landscape. And there were a number of techniques that we used to visually extend the ground of the hotel onto the facade, and eventually what we devised was a system, this kind of system that is almost, we want to patent it, which is the landscape preservation camouflage that has certain, you basically take photographs from the building from different sides, you identify the predominant colors and the order in which they happen from the ground to the cornice line of the building, and then you have these kind of algorithms that generate camouflage patterns on the surface and match the surface specifically to the site. So you see that the building then becomes clad with tiles of different materials, and we propose also some sort of menu of those materials and how the face that is looking inwards looks like the sea, and the face that is looking outwards looks like the mountain, and so on and so forth. So this is basically the Salani Hotel dressed with these techniques of camouflage using some specific tiles that have sometimes different materialities. So depending on where you look at the building, it takes a different coloring. And these are the elements. This is a catalog of elements that we were using. We were using kind of sunglass smoke hues for the windows of the building, awnings, panel partitions, and so on and so forth. And so this is the building as it is now, and this is the building after being applied the preservation camouflage that extends visually the ground onto it. Okay, last. Are we very late? What time is it?
8:12.
Huh?
8:12.
So very late. Maybe this is enough. I think maybe it's better if we don't. Actually, I mean, just very quickly. These are two kind of rural projects where we are trying to kind of explore some sort of new global rural. So the idea is this kind of confusion between the natural and the artificial that is pervading, that is predominating now most areas of our life is interesting because it perhaps suggests that we don't necessarily need to think that the rural is the enclave or is the domain of the vernacular of the different, but on the contrary, the rural is also a domain where the global is being deployed in full force, and so what we are interested in exploring now is the rural as some sort of archetype. So explore different archetypes of the rural that are like building archetypes, like for example building with earth or building with pitched roof are archetypes in some sort of neo-structuralist fashion. We are trying to explore them and there are two projects here. One of them is in this place, which is Sotogrande, is in the south of Spain. It's a resort for the wealthy. It's full of golf courses and polo things, and we have one client, which is really a wacky guy, very interesting, and is in a way our partner in this project. He's actually doing the project himself. He's an Englishman, but grown in Gibraltar for a long time, and he came to us because he wanted to have a house that was going to be built in a place where you cannot build. You can only build rural construction. So he basically selected us because we were known for doing green surfacey things, and he thought that would go well and camouflage the the project from the scrutiny of the planners. And so we started. I mean, this is the south of Spain. He wanted something that was earthy. I mean, this is in some ways a project that was part of the earth research. And so we started looking at these adobe constructions in North Africa. This place of Spain is almost like North Africa climate-wise, and also the traditional construction is very much like that. So we were looking at all this world of things, and ended up thinking that maybe it would be interesting to turn this house into some sort of accretion of circular plans. This is, by the way, from a very interesting manual that we now use all the time in this idea of redefining the global rural, which identifies the prototypes of rural construction and maps them globally. But what was interesting was that this client, whose name is Tom Haynes, is also a kind of 60s guy, had a kind of interesting past, and so we also started looking these kind of blobby shapes of the domes resonated with some of these bubble experiments in the 60s. And so this is the site. It's a farm, or this is a kind of partially a farm, but partially a beautiful forest with two ravines that he's also using as a kind of very sophisticated landscape project. Just basically to show you what is he calls one of the things Fitzcarraldo Valley, if you know the movie. This kind of things are there. So the project was started with this concept of using these dome structures, this kind of archetype of earth construction, but almost connecting it to some sort of 60s bubble diagram. And so we split all the functions in bubbles, and then we crush these bubbles together into a more or less complex and interesting geometry. And so that became the house. I'm going to go very, very fast through this. And you see that basically the openings are also holes are cut out in the domes. And this is how it sits. The house sits between two ravines in the middle of the forest, and this is the plan. This is the construction. The construction is interesting because it's a concrete construction. It's an earthy construction in this particular case that is going to be covered with a type of concrete that will grow moss. It's a specially designed concrete that we are developing with the University of Barcelona in order to cover these domes in green stuff. Again, thinking that ants will crawl around as if they were just in any other topography. Here you see the idea of the domes covered with outgrowths and this is the construction. This is under construction. So what was interesting was that the construction was a perfect match between the kind of 60s bubble culture and the earthy dome structure. He actually found some guys who are Polish but are international and travel and deliver these concrete buildings that are made out of blowing up bubbles that are custom made to make a certain shape. Then they spray concrete inside, and the bubbles then remain there as the waterproofing membrane. These are the guys, and this is the house. So basically, the house is drawn in the floor. It comes in a thing like 1 meter by 50 by 1 meter, and then it blows up. And this is inside what happens inside of the bubble, and then this is the client again with his girlfriend, very happy inside of the bubble, and then you project some kind of insulation foam that stabilizes the bubble, and once you stabilize the bubble, then you pin the reinforcement bars. And then you project more concrete. No, you project concrete. There was no concrete before. So this is basically the moment in which they are spraying concrete inside. And this is now they are putting the stucco inside of the concrete. And these are the kind of spaces that emerge out of this experiment with earth construction. The windows have to be cut out from the surface. Anyway, it's just kind of fun. This is the kind of spaces that appear inside. The second project is maybe not so much, but it's interesting in the sense that one of the things that we are doing when we are looking at these kind of archetypes of rural construction is that the buildings end up being some sort of accretion of repetitive units, and in the house we were using these domes. In this project, which is done, both of them, funnily enough, have to do with beer, because Tom's business is beer distribution, and this is a foundation that is built is now under construction, also nearly finished, in a town in Spain that is 30 kilometers away of an airport that has one plane a day. So it's like totally remote. It's an old village that has 42 inhabitants and 3 dogs, which is the birthplace of where is there? It's in León. This is the town, and is the birthplace of this guy, Don Antonino, who is the owner of the Modelo Group. He's basically the owner of Coronita. And so he wants to kind of invest in his town, and he's made this kind of amazing foundation, which is an ethno-cultural foundation devoted to the study of the rural milieu. And so the foundation does a lot of different things. It does kind of guignol for kids, but it also trains kids to use Arduino boards to control irrigation systems in the countryside, or use how to use drones as kind of fire suppressing devices. But they also organize jazz festivals. They have a lot of, as you can imagine, you know, the Modelo Group has a lot of money. They bring Richard Serra to that remote place to make an exhibition if they want. So these are pictures of what the different activities they do. But what is more interesting is that they also have animals in the building. So they keep certain types of cows and dogs and donkeys and organic seed banks in order to preserve the environment. So this is all part of this other cosmology, which is the rural cosmology that is now in this particular building. I think we are having an incredible opportunity to explore, also because of the nature of the project. In this case, we are using a pitch roof structure, which forms this basic cell, and also we were very interested in the possibility of using only wood to construct this building. We are lately very excited about the possibility that buildings can become carbon traps, And so this is a massive carbon trap where everything, including the insulation, is made out of wood. And we were interested in this kind of Fachwerk type of construction. But so the building is very simple. This is the site. Is basically 5 bays with a pitch roof next to each other. The two, I think probably there are better sections that adjust in the center one to the geometry of the site, because otherwise they don't fit. And so the central one is the foyer. To the right there is an exhibition hall. To the left there is an auditorium and some kind of workshops for music. Farther to the left are the offices, and farther to the right is the art storage, because they have an art collection that where they are collecting global art work. And so the other interesting, or the thing that perhaps is more designy or more strange about this project, as a kind of finesse in respect to this kind of basic farm structure, is that this is a very cold place, and so we split the roofs in the longitudinal direction in order to make the drainage of the roof easier, and we used that very simple shift, which is actually not so simple when you have to build it. Then we chopped it, so we produce. You will see. I mean, the building is this kind of accretion of farms that contain these different functions. But let me see if I can show you a better image of that. Well, it has also is oriented north-south. So on the south side, there are these lattices that protect the glass. They are on the north and south faces. There is fully glazed cladding. On the rest of it is all wood. But on the south face, either they extend in order to protect the glass from the sun, or they have these sun shading lattices. There you see and as I was explaining, when we chop off this kind of shed that has been kinked at the center, we get these diamond-shaped skylights that are lighting the main. This is the site. This is a rendering of basically how this building was supposed to be, and this is the way. This is the most interesting thing in my view, which is the building is entirely made off-site with this system that uses wood scraps as insulation. Is basically kind of passive house type of technology. So this is the building being produced in a factory, and then being the edges of the north and south edges are these trusses that liberate the entrance, so that the movement on the ground is very open. And these are some of the spaces now being completed. This is the cow is there, walking around, and these skylights that have a diamond shape that comes out directly of the slicing horizontally of the tops of the roofs. There is one wall actually. This brick is not that we wanted to have it. Is that's the art storage, and the art storage could not be made in wood because of fire constraints. So this is one of the sheds that is not made in wood. This is the skylight. This is the space of the foyer that gives access to the auditorium and the exhibition hall. And this is the lattice on the south side. Is under construction. And this is the north side, which is much more flat glass, basically. and this was just a few months ago. There was a lot of snow there. That's all. I think there is a movie now that I can leave while you think if you are going to ask me something. Thank you very much for your attention.